Hi, my name is Tom Wilson. I'm the priest, or one of the priests over at All Saints Episcopal Church in Southern Shores, North Carolina. And this is the sermon for this coming week, or tomorrow actually, and it's on the first Sunday of Lent, March the 9th, 2014. I'm calling it Tempting Shadows. And it's based on the lessons of Genesis 2:15 through 17 and 3 through 1 through 7, which is the temptation story of Adam and Eve, Romans 5:12 through 19, and Matthew 4:1 through 11, which is the story of Jesus going into the wilderness and temptations. Now, I need to warn you about this ahead of time. I just got back from another dream intensive where we focused in on shadows and how we can identify them in our dreams. So that's going to be one of the themes, that's tempting shadows. So why does Jesus go out into the wilderness as related in Matthew's gospel for today? Matthew says that Jesus was led by the Spirit after Jesus was baptized. So Jesus is beginning his new ministry and he wants to get ready. So how does anyone get ready for anything? I mean, uh, for instance, I expect a carpenter to get all of his tools together to see if they still work or if they're sharp enough. Now, Jesus was a carpenter, and he knew these tools well. So since his new task is not carpentry, what does he have to do to prepare? Well, the only thing he has is the fullness of his being, his body, his mind, his spirit. He wants to become whole and complete for his ministry. He begins fasting, the discipline of doing without the usual food of nourishment in order to be hungry for being fed by God. Episcopalians aren't that anxious to fast because we have a hard time denying anything for ourselves. Um, if we might go on a diet and lose weight, but do we ever complain when we're on that diet? But the purpose of fasting is not to lose weight, but to feel a different kind of hunger. The life that Jesus is entering is going to be difficult, and Jesus knows that he'll have to have a passion for the hunger for God to feed his spirit. So he's also there to get rid of so much stuff that has cluttered his life, all the fears, the hurts, the prejudices, and assumptions that are part of his life. And we dump things in the wilderness away from people, and that's where Jesus is going. He's also there to claim his whole being, and he will go into his very self to struggle with the shadow within, the unconscious side of himself. We all have shadows that are part of ourself. As John Sanford defines it, the shadow is the dumping ground for all those characteristics of our personality that we disown. Shadows are always at the places and times of greatest light. Jung noted that the most religious places in the world have the darkest shadows. Think of Jerusalem. Think of Rome, Ireland, Spain, and so many other places. And reflect on the fact that much of the bloodshed and violence in the world have had that elements of religion as the cause. That light, search for light, also has a great darkness. The attempt of humans to have harmony with God somehow often devolves into disharmony between fellow human beings. Now, Jesus has just had his baptismal experience, and he was in the light of the Spirit, and he knew he had to go deeper into the shadow in order to make sure he would not fall into that trap. Our shadows dwell in the darkness of our own unconscious. We need to be aware of all those things that we have pushed down out of our consciousness, but that have this nasty habit of coming to us in our dreams or visions and spring up when we project the shadow onto another person. We need to bring these shadows to light so that we are aware of them. Jesus will later warn of this inability to see our own shadows when he says, first, take care of the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly how to take the speck out of your neighbor's eye. The journey into one's very self is where we encounter the shadows, and it is here when we meet some of our demons. Carl Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This latter procedure, he said, however, is disagreeable and therefore not popular. This disagreeable task of naming, meeting, struggling with, and claiming our demons is what Jesus is doing. As he fasts, he starts to have visions of meeting with the darkness that dwells within each one of us. And Matthew gives this dreamlike encounter a physical name, the devil. In the Bible, we first run into the idea of the devil as the accuser, the one who points out our faults before God. He is the one who suggests to God in the book of Job that Job may not be as pure as he seems. Later on, as his role develops, and he is identified as the tempter who we saw in the serpent in the first lesson from Genesis. We know him as the one who dwells within us as our dark shadows. For instance, I, for a time, was a pacifist. And I thought that war was just not a profitable way of resolving differences. War simply sets the stage for the next war. I became passionate about my hatred of war, and the passion was more than a logical argument. I came to realize that I had tried to push down all my anger and my innate love of violence into my unconscious, and it would come to the fore whenever I saw someone who had been a warrior. I was projecting the hatred of all of my own deep violence onto another person and hating him for being that object. It was only when I brought my violence and anger to my own consciousness that I was able to claim it as my own. I had to claim it. I had to honor it and deal with it instead of trying to hide from it and risk it coming out in inappropriate ways. When I saw the shadow within me, I had to withdraw my projections from those who reminded me of the part I did not want to claim. That's the spiritual journey we are on in Lent, to look at our shadows. Now, shadows can be identified by the emotions we have towards another person which we cannot fully explain. Now, there are bright shadows as well as dark shadows, but that's another sermon. And as people of the same gender as the dreamer in the dream, the shadow is usually that same gender. Looking at our dreams is one of the ways we can discover our shadows. This is one of the reasons we're going to take a look at dreams as a spiritual help in the Lenten programs as God helps us down into the true self for wholeness and healing. We begin this Thursday evening over soup and salad and a hunger for God. Jesus deals with three shadows in the temptation story. The first temptation, or shadow, is the desire to do without God. Jesus has entered into fasting in order to get in touch with his hunger for God. And the dark shadow suggests that he could only be himself when he took care of himself first and put all this God foolishness on the back burner. At a deeper level in this temptation was the lure to deal with things of God's creation as objects to be used for our own purposes instead of being seen first and foremost as gifts of God's love, carrying the very essence of God within their being. To go deeper into one's true self is to have a reverence and awe for all creation. The purpose of a retreat is to find that the very ground on which we walk is holy ground. If our agenda is the only thing we pay attention to, then a stone is a stumbling block. But if we look at the stone and contemplate how many millions of years it took this stone to develop, then we enter into wonder as it tells us of the mystery of God. In the wilderness, without the distraction of everyday life, we can see the stone for what it is instead of what we can make it. We see all the thousands and millions of years that it took to become the stone and to say, we know that God is here. In the wilderness, without the distraction of everyday life, we can see the tenacity of a weed to survive instead of seeing it as an invader in our garden. In a wilderness, we walk on the ground and feel every step as our foot takes its time to pay attention to every ridge and depression. As we slow down, we do not step on pests, but we acknowledge their right to be there. In a wilderness, we're able to be part of the oneness of all creation and to deal with our shadow, which whispers and tempts us to act as if our desires are the center of the universe. The second temptation is the shadow that whispers that the best way to deal with people is to manipulate them. Satan, the accuser, our shadow, hisses that Jesus could be successful if only he would impress them with the fantastic trick of throwing himself off the temple. The third temptation is the shadow hissing that the best way to deal with people is to control them. I'll place all the kingdoms of the earth into your hands if only you'd follow me. These three shadows, using things for our own purposes only and not needing God, and manipulating people and controlling them. These three shadows are the dreams of Jesus as he encounters them and brings them into consciousness. These are the universal shadows of being the center of one's own universe and our desires for manipulation and control. However, as the infomercial on television tells us, but wait, there's more. This Lent, as part of your spiritual growth into the depths of your true being, I invite you to explore your dreams and your shadows. Thank you.